So here we have a good piece in the Guardian from a guy called George Minbot, and he's putting forward his argument against demagoguery and his solution to it called political rewelding, and I think it's quite good. So we'll go through it. So you can blame Jeremy Corbyn for Boris Johnson and Hillary Clinton for Donald Trump. You can blame the Indian challengers for Modi, the Brazilian opposition for Bolsonaro, the left and centre parties in Australia, the Philippines, Hungary, Poland and Turkey for similar electoral disasters. Or you could recognise what we are witnessing is a global phenomenon. Yes, there are individual failings in all these cases, though these failings were different, polar opposites in the cases of Corbyn and Clinton. But when it came to things happening, but when the same things happen in many nations, it's time to recognise the pattern and see that heaping the blame on particular people and parties fixes nothing. In these nations, people you wouldn't trust to post a letter for you have been elected to the highest office. There is as wildly predicted, they behave like a gang of vandals given the keys to the art gallery, improving the great works in their care with spray cans, box cutters and lump hammers. In the midst of the global emergencies, they rip down environmental protections and climate agreements and trash the regulations that constrain capital and defend the poor. They wage war on institutions that are supposed to retain their powers, while in some cases committing extravagant and deliberate outrages against the rule of law. They use immunity as a political weapon, reveling in their ability to survive daily scandals, any one which could have destroyed a normal politician. Something has changed, not just the UK and the US, but many in parts of the world. A new politics funded by oligarchs, built on sophisticated cheating and provocative lies using dark ads and conspiracy theories on social media, has perfected the art of persuading the poor to vote for the interests of the very rich. We must understand that we are facing, and the new strategies are required to resist it. If there is a formula for a new demagoguery, there must also be a formula for confronting it and overturning it. I don't have a complete answer, but I believe there are some strands we can draw. In Finland, on the day of our general election, Boris Johnson's antithesis became Prime Minister, the 34-year-old San Martin, who is strong, humble and collaborative. Finland's politics, emerging from its peculiar history, cannot be replicated here. But there is one critical lesson. In 2014, the country started a program to counter fake news, teaching people how to recognise and confront it. The result is that Finns have been ranked in a recent study of 35 nations as the people most resistant to post-truth politics. Don't expect Johnson's government or Trump's to inoculate people against their own lies, but this need not be a government initiative. This week, the US Democrats published a guide to confronting online disinformation. They will seek to hold Google, Facebook and Twitter to account. I would like to see the progressive parties everywhere form a global coalition for promoting digital literacy and pressuring social media platforms to stop promoting falsehoods. But this is the less important task. The much bigger change is to stop seeking to control people from the centre. At the moment, the political mode for almost all parties is to drive change from the top down. They write a manifesto they hope to turn into government policy, which can then be subject to a narrow or feeble constitution, which then leads to legislation, which then leads to change. I believe the best antidote to demagoguery is the opposite process: radical trust. To the greatest extent possible, Parties and governments should trust communities to identify their own needs and make their own decisions. Over the past few years, our relationship with nature is begun to be transformed by the new approach of rewilding. Bizarre as this might sound, I believe this thinking could inform a new model of politics. It is time for political rewilding. When you try to control the nature from the top down, you find yourself in a constant battle with it. Conservation groups in this context often seek to treat complex living systems as if they were simple ones. Through intensive management, cutting, grazing, and burning, they strive to beat nature into submission until it meets their idea of how it should behave. But ecologies, like all complex systems, are highly dynamic, adaptive, evolving when allowed, in emergent and unpredictable ways. Eventually and inevitably, all these attempts at controlled nature fail. Nature reserves managed this way tend to lose to abundance and diversity, and require even more extreme intervention to meet the irrational demands of their stewards. They also become vulnerable. In all systems of complex, it tends to be resilient, while keeping simplified tends to be fragile. Keeping nature in a state of arrested development in which almost all of its natural processes in its keystone species, the animals that drive the processes, are missing, and it makes it highly susceptible to climate breakdown and invasive species. But rewilding, allowing dynamic, spontaneous organization to reassert itself, can result in a sudden flourishing, often in completely unexpected ways, with a great improvement in resilience. The same applies to politics. Mainstream politics are controlled by party machines and are sought to reduce the phenomenal complex of human society into a simple linear model that can be controlled from the center. The political and economic systems it creates are simultaneously highly unstable and lacking in dynamism. They are susceptible to collapse, and many northern towns can testify. While unable to regenerate themselves, they become vulnerable to toxic, invasive forces of ethno-nationalism and suppression. And supremacism. But in some parts of the world, towns and cities have begun to reweld their politics. Councils have caused mass participation, then, to the greatest extent possible, stepped back to allow it to evolve. Classic examples include proprietary budgeting in Porto Alegre in Brazil, Decide Madrid system in Spain, the Better Reykjavik program in Iceland. Local people have reoccupied the political space and have been captured by party machines and a top-down government. They have worked out together with their communities what they need and how to make it happen, refusing to let politicians frame the questions or determine the answers. The results have been extraordinary, a massive re-engagement in politics, potentially and particularly among marginalised groups, and dramatic improvements in local life. Pretority politics does not require the blessing of a central government, just a confident and far-sighted local authority. Is this a formula for a particular party to regain power? No. It's much bigger than that. It's a formula for taking back control, making our communities more resilient to the machinations of any government in Westminster less relevant. This radical devolution is the best defense against capture by any political force. Let's change the nature of politics in this country. Let's allow the fascinating, unpredictable dynamics of a functioning society to emerge. Let the wild romps begin. I sort of agree. Essentially, it's giving more power to people at a local level. And I agree with that, but part of the problem is we have to campaign to get it to happen. Now, there are some really good examples that he cited here. I encourage you, go look them up. They are quite fascinating themselves to have a look at and the impact it had on those local communities. But if Barnsley Council decide to do this, then there could be some real serious change actually happen in this town, regardless of the Conservative government that is in power. So let me know what you think.